Rahim. Today we are going to start our lesson about aggregate demand. This lesson is for AS boys. They are also having this topic in their AS syllabus of macroeconomics. And before studying the multiplier model in A2, we also need to revise these things which are about the aggregate demand and its components. Then we will be moving towards multiplier model after completing this topic. Okay, aggregate demand. Aggregate means total. We all know in macroeconomics we will study the economic variables at the national level or aggregate level. So this is the aggregate demand. It is demand of all the goods and services produced by a country in a given year. You all know aggregate demand or aggregate expenditures, they are equal to C plus I plus G plus net exports. So C stands for consumption, that is the household expenditures on the consumption of the goods and services. So consumption means the household expenditure, whereas investment, that is the producer's expenditure on the buying of the capital goods, which will further increase the level of goods and services produced by a country. So G stands for the government spending. So government spending, that is the expenditure on the development projects which will create employment opportunities, and that will be the reason for increase in aggregate demand in the country. So net exports, we all know these are the exports minus imports. Exports are denoted by X, whereas imports are denoted by M. So net exports means exports minus imports. When our goods are more demanded by the foreigners, then our net export side will be a positive sign, and when our imports are more than exports, then our net exports will be the negative sign. So now aggregate demand is also downward sloping. We all know demand curve in microeconomics, that is downward sloping, which was showing us inverse relationship between the price of the product and its quantity demanded. So here we are taking two variables on the axis. So aggregate demand is also downward sloping like the market demand of a product. Aggregate demand shows inverse relationship between the general price level and real GDP when other factors are kept constant. So this is the shape of aggregate demand. Keep it in mind. Here in aggregate demand, we are writing real GDP on our horizontal axis. Real GDP means now it is exclusive of inflation. Now it is measured at constant price level, but on the vertical side we are, instead of writing only the price, we are writing the price level. Some of the students, they write only P or price only. That will make a wrong thing in their diagram, and Cambridge examination they will be facing the deduction of marks. So price level, write in complete form the price level and real GDP. Now aggregate demand, that is downward sloping. Downward sloping means when prices are falling, more goods and services will be demanded by the people of the country, and vice versa. When prices are increasing, less number of goods and services will be demanded by the people of a country. So why aggregate demand curve is downward sloping? Why it slopes downward? Like in microeconomics, we studied when price of a product decreases, more quantity will be demanded by the consumers due to substitution and income effects of the normal good. For A level students, they might be knowing what is meant by substitution effect and income effect. So here we will be finding three reasons why aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. The first effect is real income effect. In some of the books it is written real wealth effect or PIGO effect. That's given another name, PIGO effect. So when the general price level increases, the real income or real wealth of people of the country will decrease. Their purchasing power of income or wealth will decrease. Therefore they will demand less goods and services. So prices, they are affecting the real earnings. real wealth of the people. So in that way they will be facing a problem to buy the goods and services. So the second reason why aggregate demand curve slopes downward, that is the reason of rate of interest. For example, when prices of the product general price level increases, people want to buy the goods, they will want to borrow more loans from the lenders. So when demand for loans is increasing due to increase in demand of the goods and services, so the lenders of those loans will increase the rate of interest on their loans. So due to increase in the rate of interest, people are borrowing less, so the demand of the goods will also be less in the market. So interest rate is also one of the reason why people are demanding less, because interest rate is higher, less loans are demanded, so less goods and services will be purchased in the market. When people increase the demand of loans to buy more goods and services, the lenders will increase the rate of interest, people will borrow less loans, all right, and they will be able to buy less goods and services. It happens when the general price level was increasing and people started to borrow less loans. So what is the international market effect or foreign sector effect? When prices of our exports are increasing, the foreigners will buy less of our exports, all right. So less of our exports are purchased by the foreigners. So this is the aggregate demand curve, which shows us why aggregate demand slopes downward. When prices are falling, more real GDP will be demanded by the people of that country. Now what are the reasons behind the shift of this aggregate demand curve? So aggregate demand curve will shift rightward due to increase in the population size of the country over the period of time, like after a decade the population size of a country will increase, therefore aggregate demand will shift rightward due to increase in population size. And the second factor, that is about expected price level. When we expect that in the upcoming months the prices will be increasing due to government policy or due to any external factor, so people rush towards the market to buy more goods and services. So at present time, aggregate demand in the country will shift rightward, and when it is expected that in the upcoming period general price level will be decreasing, so at present time aggregate demand will shift downward. So the expected price levels, that can be one of the reason why aggregate demand shift rightward. So when consumption at present time increases, aggregate demand will shift rightward due to more expected price level in the future. So when future prices are expected to decrease, then aggregate demand at present time will shift leftward. So this blue line is showing us the increase in aggregate demand at all the general price level. When the rate of interest on loans decreases, the investment will increase by the private sector and aggregate demand will shift rightward. It will also increase employment and aggregate demand in the economy will again increase and it will shift rightward, like in the above diagram we have seen. So government spending, that will create more employment opportunities. If the government increases its expenditures on the development projects, it will increase the employment and aggregate demand in the economy. If the government decreases the taxes, the disposable income of the people will increase and aggregate demand will increase and it will shift rightward. If the global income level, like foreigners, they are having boom in their economy, like in European economy or US economy, there is more economic activity, so their income level will increase, so they will buy more of our exports. As a result, our aggregate demand will shift rightward. So if in other countries there is economic turmoil, there is going to be recession in USA or in European market, so our exports demand will decrease and aggregate demand will also shift downward. So if our national income level increases, people will buy more imported goods and aggregate demand of domestic goods will fall. So when we buy more imported goods, so aggregate demand of our goods will shift downward. What about the exchange rate? Exchange rate, when it depreciates, the foreigners will be their currency will be becoming stronger against our currency. So as a result, our aggregate demand will shift rightward. And on the other hand, when our exchange rate appreciates, our currency becomes stronger. The foreigners will face that they have to pay in terms more in terms of their own currency, so they will buy less of our goods. So aggregate demand will shift downward. Due to appreciation of our exchange rate, our people they face this thing that their currency is becoming stronger, so they will be buying more of the imported goods. So aggregate demand of our goods within our market will also shift downward. So there is a question at the end: explain why aggregate demand slopes downward and which factors will cause its shifts. It carries 10 marks. There are again the questions. There is a brief introduction again by we can see over here. Aggregate demand curve represents the total quantity of goods and services demanded in an economy at various price levels. The aggregate demand curve slopes downward due to three main reasons. One is the wealth effect, okay, second is the interest rate effect, foreign trade effect, and questions at the end. I have selected a few questions for you people, that why aggregate demand curve slopes downward and what are the reasons behind its shifts. So there can be a question related to this topic in your final exam, especially in Cambridge. They sometimes give us the reasons for aggregate demand to shift rightward or leftward, and why slopes downward. That's very very important for the students to understand the reasons why it slopes downward. People or students they consider that, like in microeconomics, they were only talking about the inverse relationship between price and the quantity demanded, but it is not same in case of macroeconomics. Macro deals with aggregate variables at the national level rather than at the individual market level. So for A2, they have to go through this topic again and again. Then I will be moving towards multiplier effect after doing the components of aggregate demand, because multiplier requires you people should know about what is meant by consumption, saving, government spending, taxes, exports and imports, and how Keynesian cross will be showing us the level of national income in the economy. And from that Keynesian cross we will be able to see how aggregate demand shifts outward, and it will be causing the multiplier effect in the national income to change. Thank you very much for this lesson.